Our first speaker is Nadia Faucher at my left, and je vais l'introduire. Nadia Faucher
Nadia Faucher has been working for the past 10 years in the area of international cooperation with social justice organizations. A graduate in criminology and international relations, Nadia has always been interested in social justice issues in Canada and abroad. At Inter-Paris, she's responsible for the Inter-Paris program in Colombia and Peru for about 5 years now, a program focusing mostly on the transition towards fairer and more egalitarian societies after an armed conflict. Nadia is also a member of the steering committee of the Americas Policy Group, a coalition of some 40 organizations of Canadian civil societies dealing with development and social justice issues in the Americas and with the Canadian foreign policy in the Americas. Nadia is also very engaged in her community in the struggle against women's sexual violence and also in the organizing of the social forum of the Outaouais area. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce to you Nadia. Good evening. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you tonight in French and also to sending the invitation to come here to my family in Montreal and Quebec. Maybe they are listening to me. It makes me a little more nervous. Equality is the main theme of our annual report and our meeting tonight. Rita told you a bit about the content of the report. When I was trying to get prepared for tonight, I noticed that it was a theme that was seen everywhere in the media since the 2008 crisis. It feels like all of a sudden it's a current issue. But for us at Inter-Paris, it's been a current issue for the past 35 years. It seems that the crisis finally highlighted the consequences of inequalities, and they are now identified as a risk to our economic and social stability. We knew that too. We know that the global financial crisis has had a profound impact on people's life and has seen a reduction of migrant workers, a weakening of export income, a rise of the unemployment rate, a weakening of commodity prices, and huge price increase for food and energy. We know that there's 130 to 155 million more people who live in poverty and almost 1 billion who go to bed hungry. That's scary. In Canada, we know about the consequences of the crisis and inequalities. Armin will be talking about this a little more, so I won't spend time on this. But according to recent research in the Spirit Level book, that maybe some of you know, that social inequalities is not only a moral issue, it is the sign of a serious social crisis. According to northern countries' data, it says that egalitarian society experience a lot less physical and mental health problems, less addiction, crime, incarceration, violence, and that on the other hand, there's a high level of children well-being in a more egalitarian society. You know that instinctively here, but by seeing it on paper, sometimes it helps us put more pressure. It shows that an egalitarian society is happier and healthier, and that there's more social cohesion, confidence, and civic engagement. So you can say, like I do, the solution to the crisis we've known does not reside only in the economy. In our annual report this year, we're not only looking at the consequences or the reality of economic disparities. We looked at other inequalities like legal inequalities and also democracy, because we believe that it is important if we really want to reduce inequalities. The report is based on various examples on how our counterparts are doing. And that's what I will be talking about tonight. So now I'll take you on a trip. On a trip to Peru first. It's a country where I go on a regular basis. If you don't know where it is in South America, on the Pacific coast, just north of Chile, and Interpares has been working there since the beginning of the 90s. A bit of a context now. Peru was the theater of armed conflicts for almost 20 years. It came to an end at the beginning of the 2000s. The violence was mostly perpetrated in the remote areas, far from urban centers, far from Lima. But just like armed conflicts in the Americas, it is the profound inequalities that are the basis of the conflict. In Peru, there were disparities between the coastal urban areas, the capital Lima, and the Andean and the Amazon areas where the Aboriginal and peasants live mostly. They were the most impacted by the armed conflicts and still are affected by disparities. So last November, I went to the area of Huancavelica. If you want to repeat the name of these areas at the end of my speech, you're welcome to do so. So we went to the Huancavelica area in the Andes. It is basically in the center of the country. I was with some local partners, Silvia Toledo and Maruja Toledo, who work for Project Counseling Service. The trip is a fairly long one, so we drove for the first day. We go there in 2 days because otherwise it'd be too tiring. The first day, we go up to 4,800 meters of altitude. We go through a pass, and then we go back down where we slept overnight. Usually we leave early in the morning to go to the city of Huancavelica. Yet, when I was there in November, that morning, we had a little unexpected trip to the police department because during the breakfast, when we were ready to go, really, somebody broke into my hotel room and stole my computer and my camera. Unfortunately, that's why I don't have any pictures to show you tonight, because somebody in that city has my camera and the pictures. So that stopover at the police department was interesting for me. It was my first time in Peru with the police. And the way that my colleague Sylvia was treated, I'm a foreigner, so I was well treated. But Sylvia, who's about this height, and she's a lawyer, and she can speak up, you know. And she was trying to make things move along a bit. And the way that she was treated by the police officers, really, they were just pushing us over, not answering our question. I just wanted to denounce the burglary of a computer. Imagine an Aboriginal woman who's trying to denounce human crime, you know, or spousal violence or something like that. It was really an eye-opening experience. So finally, after 4 or 5 hours, we were able to leave. And we traveled by daytime to the city of Huancavelica. And the city where we work, Huancavelica, is part of a very poor region of Peru, and that was really hardly hit by the conflict. And we had various meetings, including one with Elsa. Elsa works for a local organization called Manuela Ramos. The role of Elsa and Manuela is to support the councillors, women who are elected on regional, municipal, and provincial councils in these regions. And I met, actually, it was the second time I met Elsa. The first time was 4 or 5 years ago on my first visit. What's interesting is that during these 2 meetings, it was just after a regional election, so there were new councillors that were just elected. And during my first visit, some 5 years ago, there was a lot of optimism and pride when people were talking about the work of the network, and that some 100 women were just elected in these various councils. So there was a lot of work to do. And this was mostly due because there is a quota legislation in Peru. That is, that there's a certain quota of women that must be elected on municipal councils. So women are not necessarily at the bottom of the list, of candidates. Some are automatically elected because they have to alternate between men, women. But these quotas exist in other countries also. But if you want really transforming results with such policy, you need the civil society to support these women and help them transform the power play that goes on in city councils. So that's what the network is doing, the network supported by Interpares in terms of mentoring and support to these women. These women are often isolated. There's one counselor per one city council or municipality that is 3 hours away from the next city. So it's a difficult situation. The training, mentoring, support are necessary so that she can really accomplish their duties. Because you won't be surprised about this. The role of some of these counselors is sometimes limited to serving drinks during the meetings, and sometimes they're not even called when meetings are taking place. And worse, sometimes their husbands, who are not even elected, will speak in their stead. So there's a lot of work to be done. Yet, the basic work that's being done is transforming the power relationship that's going on. That's why I wanted to tell you about this example. I think that we are really helping to encourage the fair participation of women in the management of municipalities, and we give them a voice. So when I went back last November 2010, we had the electoral results from October. Unfortunately, the level of energy had plummeted. Everything had to be redone. All the councillors elected 5 years ago were not re-elected, even the ones that ran again. Some women were elected, but none of the ones who wanted to be re-elected. So it's a very short period, 4 or 5 years, to try and transform things. You need continuity. So there was a lot of disappointment, of course. But despite this disappointment, Elsa, whom I met again, and her organization were determined to make sure that the past councillors could transfer their knowledge to the new ones. They knew they had to start over again, but it was worthwhile. It's an interesting model because we combine a public policy with the civil society, and that's what allows us to make things move ahead. So the next day, of course, I was a little disappointed. We got back on the road with another organization called CISAI. We've been working with them too. And one of the employees there, Rigoberto, took us to Huancavelica. We were going south. We were southbound, and we drove for several hours on winding roads. And there's communities here and there, but we see mostly llamas, alpacas, sheep, and things like that, just to give you a visual idea of what we were seeing. I get sick in the car, so that was awful. But when we got to describe you what happens in this area. Jucamarca is a community located very close to Ayacucho. Ayacucho was the center of the armed conflict because that's where the Shining Path group comes from. So the population there was really caught between the Peruvian army and the Shining Path at the end of the conflict. There were no more civil society. The confidence had disappeared in the community. There was a lot of work to rebuild, and after an armed conflict, there's no way to survive, so you had to start from scratch. And that's what Seaside was there for since the end of the conflict. What's interesting in their approach is that even though it's an organization promoting economic development for the area, they work through the development of civil society. If you want to rebuild a more egalitarian society than before, because the reasons of the conflict are the inequalities and structural inequalities, so we don't want to get back to what we had before. So their approach was to start by reconstructing civil society, work with women, with youth, with peasants, but not on an individual basis, to encourage them to create their own organizations so that they can be their own actors afterward, to dialogue with city councils, with regional councils, to propose changes in the ways that they want, as they want to manage their own lives. So it is in this context that Seaside assists the people from this area to participate in a process called the participative budget. The Peruvian state, at the end of the conflict, set up various measures to address the causes of the conflict. If you know about Latin America, you know that there are very many legislations there, but very few are implemented. So there are some legislations, yes, but all levels of government in Peru have to have a participative budget. They have to consult the population when they do their annual budget. You'll tell me it's impressive. As far as I know, it's the only country that has such a legislation. Obviously, it is a very slow process to implement. It's not implemented in the same way everywhere, and every year it has to be started again from scratch. So this has been in effect since 2003, so for the past 6-7 years we've been going through this process. When we talk about inequalities and economic disparities, to be able to have a participative budget is great to transform the conditions in which these people live. That is, they can share projects, they can invest in what they want in their communities. If they're more interested in investing in education or in agriculture, in theory, they could do so. But it doesn't always happen that way. The rules of the game are fairly complex, so they need some mentoring from organizations like Interpares and Seaside to make sure that the local population can really fully participate. And that's what we did in the Comarca area. We, for instance, well, what I mean is that we help the organizations to register because they have to register in a specific place. The model to submit projects to is fairly complex, so we provide assistance. We're talking about Quechua peasants here who not only don't speak Spanish, but they can't write either. So there's quite a bit of mentoring to do, accompaniment to be done every year. And there's also accompaniment for the follow-up. Sometimes a project is approved and then poof, the next year nothing is happening. So there's a strong civil society, yes. The results that we see, we see them in the areas where there are a solid civil society, a society that's really present. If it's not present, the policies may not be implemented and we may not have the impact that we want to have. So, the experience of the participative budget, well, the two examples I gave you are examples to that have great potentials, and it starts from the bottom up, really, from the grassroots. We're work at the national level, but we must start from the grassroots if we want to transform the situation, if we want to eradicate inequalities and economic disparities. They have the tools, but we're just helping them to use them. You'll tell me, well, what do you do in Canada to provoke a change? Well, my role here in Ottawa is mostly to make sure that the Canadian government policies, namely the foreign policy, will not have a negative impact. From what we've seen now is that this strategy that's put forward by the government in power is putting the emphasis on the Canadian economic interests in the Americas, and that's being done now. And we're not asking ourselves if the policies that are being implemented will help reduce the inequalities or increase them. So my role here is also to ensure this follow-up, to get engaged in coalitions. We can't work on our own, obviously, so we work with coalitions, and something that we will be continue to do. So in conclusion, I'd say that my colleague will talk to you, Armin will talk to you a little more about Canada, but what I said tonight are two concrete examples on how we can change things and how we've been doing it for almost 10 years now. So thank you.